Thank you very much, Professor Sam, for this fantastic work. Ladies and gentlemen, for us, it was also important to have major stakeholders on the international level, and they are with us today. I have the honor to present you Professor Sylvana Côté. She is a psychologist. She studied in the universities of McGill, Laval, Montreal, and Carnegie Mellon. She is now a professor in the Department of Social and Preventive Medicine of the Montreal University and deputy head of the Brain and Development of Children at the Saint-Justine of Montreal Hospital. She's working mainly on psychopathologies for development and epidemiology of mental health. Her studies are focused on associations between family risk and development, as well as intergenerational transmission of physical and mental health issues, while focusing on the trajectory of children. Dear colleague Côté, you have the floor. Your Majesty, dear guests, dear colleagues, thank you very much for allowing me to talk today about mental health and also the knowledge that led us to think that investments in the 5 first years of life are the best investment of a society in the long-term development of people. I could have talked in Quebecois, in English with a Quebecois accent, or in English with a Quebecois accent. I decided to speak French, but still with that accent from Quebec. This is the overview of my presentation. I'm going to put forward 2 arguments explaining that the 5 first years in life are of critical importance for your lifelong development. First argument, neurodevelopment argument, and the second one, economic argument. Then I'll put forward 2 examples of programs that can be implemented at the population level, taking into account risk population in order to promote development and good mental health of our children. Mental health problems have multiple causes. These are very complex problems. There are 3 big areas that are determining them: genetics, environmental factors, and interventions or services that are provided in order to mitigate them. When we have a look at the etiology of mental health problem, we need to take into account the interactions between genes and environment, genes and interventions, environment and interventions, and the interventions between the 3 of them. The etiology study leads to many studies, obviously, on the impact of the different influences on the development of a person. Actually, one of the most important reasons in order to intervene in early childhood is quite simple, and we know it intuitively. The ability of the brain to change in response to experiences reduces drastically in the first years of our life. Then you have another curve that is the opposite curve, showing that the effort required in order to change behavior is increasing with age. Oh, sorry, I'm mixing up with my slides. This is the right one. In early childhood, the brain can really be changed. There is a high plasticity of the brain. When later on in life we require a lot of effort in order to change the behavior and brain, it's really difficult to do so then. There have been general overall studies on the plasticity of the brain. This is a recent publication in Nature, one of the greatest journal in that area, showing that human hippocampal neurogenesis drops sharply in children to undetectable levels in adults. Neurogenesis is the ability of the brain to regenerate. You can see here dendrites that are really prevalent in young people that are much less prevalent in older people. The development of the brain is not done in a vacuum. You have an environment, and it plays a vital role for the behavior of the child. You can see that on the developmental curve of the gray matter in the brain depending on the socio-economic status, SES. Ages from 5 months to 37 months, then gray matter on the left-hand side. Blue, low SES, that means low education, low revenues, low prestige from the parents' activities, compared to the volumes of children coming from other socioeconomic layers. You can see a real difference from one children to another depending on their background. Why? Here is an example to explain it. Numbers of words heard by children. It depends on the social and economic status of the family, SES again. You can see here in less favored families, middle favored families, and more privileged families. You can see a clear difference. The socioeconomic gradient now. The more you are unprivileged, the higher the prevalence of mental and physical health problems. It is also being reflected in violent behaviors at teenage years, self-mutilation and violence towards the other. Then adulthood, very, very clear gradient here, and well-documented one at that, showing that the higher the poverty, the higher the level of health problems, mental or physical health problems. It's not surprising, therefore, to observe biases in the IQ, verbal and nonverbal IQ scores in young children younger than 5 years since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. Structures welcoming children, kindergartens, and so on and so forth, have been closed. Therefore, the development of the child is more dependent on families than it was previously. And it led to biases, especially in families that are struggling socio-economically. Now, let's have a look at the economic argument. This is the Jim Ekman curve, Nobel Economy Prize. He used experimental studies that have monitoring at a very long term. They have shown a reduction in the unemployment rate and violence rate and mental health issues to show that investment on the prenatal period have the best return on investment, ROI. Then they are followed by interventions between 2 and 4 years at school, and then you have the reintegration on the labor market. And this led to this sentence: skills beget skills. In early year, the brain is a kind of pension fund. The earlier you act, the higher your ROI. The studies of Jim Ekman are based in North America, obviously, but I wanted to show you a summary of a report that has been carried out by the Swiss Bank, showing that investment in kindergartens could increase the GDP of 0.5% every year, and that it is completely profitable in 10 years. Many industrial countries and Western countries are now creating a pre-scholar education network. In the majority of countries, though, investments, public spendings are inversely proportional to the growth of the brain. On the x-axis, you have the age, and the public spendings increasing with the development of the individuals, while we know that the brain is developing in early years of one's life. That is especially the case in children living in struggling backdrops, socio-economic difficulties. I'm saying that as a nutshell because it regroups, it combines many factors that are leading to a non-optimal backdrop. We see that the return on investment is higher when it is done earlier and when it is also targeting risk populations. We have another reason for that. Here it is. Studies are trying to distinguish the role of mental ability and that can be attributed to the genes or the environment, to show that the lower the economic status of children, the environment has a higher impact than when children are belonging to a higher social economic background. For those last children, genes are more important. That means that the impact is higher for non-privileged children. What can we do? I was really glad to see in the movie that we are trying to support distressed pregnant women, because there are many of them. And I'll come back on the epidemiological data on this later on. These are the interventions, preschool interventions. Were used as an example in development of many preschool interventions and the nurse-family partnership. It is a program to support pregnant women in vulnerability situation during pregnancy. The ROI varies between $4 and $10. And it leads to a reduction of crime, of distress, of violence, an improvement of mental and physical health, also school success. So support for vulnerable pregnant women. Depression during pregnancy is not exceptional. It is estimated to affect 1 woman out of 5. It is especially prevalent in women coping with very high stresses. During the pandemic, this is a study, by the way, published in The Lancet quite recently. It is referring to the additional burden related to the pandemic when it comes to anxiety and stress in the whole society. You can see a rectangle over there. Women in childbearing age had higher problems when it comes to depression and anxiety in those years. And this leads us into thinking that those children grew in more stressful contexts than before the pandemic. Therefore, we'll need to support them. But there are things that we can do. The US Preventive Task Force published in 2018 an excellent article, and it was collecting possible interventions for women. Just to let you know that there are a number of interventions that are working when it comes to psychosocial health. For childhood intervention, it's not the same as in clinical studies where we use pharmacology. Here we have social support. It is a highly potent molecule helping reduce mental health problems. This report shows avenues of opportunities for psychosocial interventions during pregnancy in an evidence-based manner. Then, let's have a look at the countries showing the best health results for their children. Those countries show the least social inequalities. This is the Gini coefficient, low inequality, high inequality on the right-hand side. You can see the countries. And the lower it is, the better it is. It is a UNICEF report. Countries with the least social inequalities have the best health for their children. So policies in order to reduce social inequalities for children aim at receiving those children in high qualitative context with a lot of goodness, benevolence as well, and low access barriers. It is, by the way, a sustainable development goal that is of the utmost importance for capital development. It is SDG 4 and 4.2 more specifically. That is, by 2030, making sure that all boys and girls have access to development activities and development of early childhood and quality preschool activities, preparing them for primary school. It is highly well documented that at primary school age, once children are lagging behind, it is very difficult for them to catch up. We have been able to show that preschool education of quality that is provided by quality staff help to reduce inequalities when it comes to mental health for behavioral disorders and emotional disorders. They also helped rebalance the differences between the richest and poorest people. According to the United Nations, in the preparation report for the post-pandemic recovery, say it is of the utmost importance to use the power of science for a fairer, more resilient and more sustainable future. Of course, we are trying to do that, but in our situation, we need to focus on science. That means we need to have a cross-sectorial data in health and social services, allowing us to understand which people, which children are suffering on the longer term, rather than those that are able to recover after the pandemic disruption. Many children, by the way, are able to recover after the pandemic.
Coming to my last slide, what we encourage to do is what we call tier interventions. So light, mild interventions to start with for that are non-stigmatizing, inclusive within welcoming centers, and then more targeted interventions on social and vulnerabilities. And these two tiers, these two levels should reduce the social burden, the hardship, and also reduce the burden on the educational and the medical systems that support children. Let me conclude with three key messages. Mental health disorders start in childhood. Socio-economic vulnerability during childhood and early childhood determines the physical and mental health throughout life. Early interventions, those that occur before the age of 5, give the best results when it comes to social and economic outcomes, as well as the reduction of social burden and psychological distress.